Hello, my name is Jennifer Palmer, and the book that I chose to read, it is called The Book Thief. The author's name of this book, his name is Marcus Zusak, and the publisher is Alfred Koff, New York. It is written during a time when Hitler was in charge, and the Jewish people were being rounded up and put into concentration camps or murdered. And the story revolves mainly around a young girl who's 11 years old when she enters foster care because her mother could not take care of her anymore, and her younger brother had just died. And so she went and lived with a family, a German family. The foster's father's name was Hans, and Rosa was a foster mother. Hans was a really, really good father to Lysel. He was phenomenal, helped her through her grief unconditionally, helped her through her nightmares. He even taught her how to read. She did not know how to read because when she was supposed to be learning how to read, she wasn't in school that often, or she was, being moved around. And so she missed that opportunity, but her passion did not stop. She wanted to learn how to read, and Hans taught her how to read by going into the basement, and he would paint words on the wall, and then he'd cover those words. It would be like from a book. He would go over those words with her and their meaning and everything, make sure that she knew how to say them, and then he would paint over the wall gray again, and then he would go over those words once again with her, and it continued. And so she started learning how to read that way. Also, another relationship she developed was actually with a Jewish man. The foster family harbored a Jewish man. He came into Lysel's life, and his name was Max, and he was like 25. And so he had to stay away from the windows, and he couldn't be seen from anybody from the outside, so he stayed in the basement. And so what happened was a relationship just blossomed between Lysel and Max. It was beautiful. He treated her so sweetly, and they talked about everything underneath the sun, and she read to him, and he wrote her a story. Another relationship that she had developed too was with a boy named Rudy, and he was in the neighborhood, and they would spend a lot of time playing soccer with a gang of kids. And they also, like during tough times when food had to be rationed and they were hungry, the kids were hungry, especially Rudy, they would go to local farms and steal fruit and like potatoes from their property. One time they almost got caught. So that was a really, really great relationship that she had. It's called The Book Thief because Lysel had such a passion and insatiable need to want more and more books that she started stealing from a very prominent family in the neighborhood. She would sneak in at nighttime and go to the library that they had, and she would steal books. And she did that like approximately 3 times. And there's a story behind that too. And it turned out to be a beautiful story. However, eventually Max had to leave, and then Hans had to go off to war. And he wasn't gone very long. He had broken his leg, so he had to come back, and which was great. But when he came back, then the bombings of his community started taking place. And what would happen is they would hear the sirens, and their their basement was too small or too shallow. They would go into another person's cellar or basement in the neighborhood, and all the people would go there too because their basements weren't adequate. And during that time when they're waiting and they're hearing the sirens and they're hearing bombs going off, Lysel would actually start reading to them. And she learned through the passion from the one boy and the 2 men in her life, how to comfort people. And so she started reading to them, and everybody would calm down and just listen to her read. She also read to a lady who had just lost her son in the war, and she was very grief-stricken. And once again, she knew how grief felt, and she knew how to console. And so she would go to this lady at certain times and read to her, even though the lady was a basket case, and try to help her through that. And then when Hans did come home and everything, he had to, he started painting the windows black. And there wasn't any black paint left, but he used charcoal, and he, colored the paint. And he did a lot of homes, not even for anything, maybe a cup of tea, maybe a snack. But he went and painted all their windows so that when the bombing took place, they wouldn't be able to see any lights and say, oh, okay, that's a good place to bomb. There's, a home down there, there's lights. So he did that. And I'm not going to say how the story ends because it is pretty tragic. It is mainly about the story is not about the ending. The story is about the relationships that occurred during this very, very trying time. The beautiful relationships that occurred, how to help each other grieve, how to get through things together, how to rely on somebody. And it was basically a story based on love. I would recommend this book to anybody who wants to learn about this time era and what people went through. It wasn't only the Jewish people that suffered. I mean, they did go through tremendous suffering, don't get me wrong, but German people did too. And during that time that everybody was having a very difficult time, like I said, a lot of relationships that were developed to help each other. So I would recommend it for anybody that would want to learn about that time era, this book. But however, I'm not reading any more about the time era of Hitler, because after this book I was crying, and it probably took me an hour and a half to stop crying because I'm a big softie that way. And I'm not reading any more books about that time era, because I've read The Nightingale, and I've read The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, and yeah, they always leave me in tears because there's so much grief and loss and evilness that occurs. I'm going to read a part here in this book. It's on page 509. 509, where's it at? Here it is. This is the last time she's seen Max. Okay. God, there were so many of them, so many sets of dying eyes and scuffing feet. Lysol searched them, and it was not so much a recognition of facial features that gave Max Vandenberg away. It was how the face was acting, also studying the crowd, mixed in concentration. Lysol felt herself pausing as she found the only face looking directly into the German spectators. It examined them with such purpose that people on either side of the book thief noticed and pointed him out. "What's he looking at?" The book thief stepped onto the road. Never had movement been such a burden. Never had a heart been so definite and big in her adolescent chest. She stepped forward and said very quietly, "He's looking for me." Her voice trailed off and fell away. Inside, she had to refine it, reaching far down to learn to speak again and call out his name. "Max! I'm here, Max!" Louder. "Max, I'm here!" He heard her. So yeah, I recommend this book. Just make sure you have tissues available.